What the instruments label as 3i/Atlas is not what it seems. When I tell you what that name really hides, your whole idea of contact, of how a single object can reflect a civilization back at us, will change. My name is Michael Reyes. I'm 38 years old, and I worked as a trauma surgeon at an isolated research outpost that sat beneath a radio-quiet sky. I am not an astronomer. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am someone who held a body at dawn and listened to a presence that spoke without sound, and then watched the world try to name what we were feeling. This matters because the threat was never purely physical. It was a resonance. It was a frequency in which fear amplified itself until it bent public perception into a new reality. If you want to understand how an encounter can turn into a collective crisis and then into a choice that heals a whole system, stay with me. Subscribe and ring the bell to follow this series. The supplemental guide with breathing and centering exercises that helped our team is linked in the top comment. Now, let me tell you how that night began and how saving a strange being forced me to uncover a secret so chilling it resembled a mirror held up to the entire planet. The alarm came as a brittle note through the station's speakers at 03:12 local time. I remember the way the sky looked then because it was the color of metal under cold light. The radio operator Jonas Hale shouted numbers into the handset. Elena Park from the observatory called with a voice half shock and half measurement. A faint trail had been spotted that did not follow Keplerian expectations. We drove out with the rescue team through a wind that tasted like iron and dust. The ground smelled sharp under our boots, like the inside of a healed wound. We found a crater that was more clean than anything natural should be. Its edges hummed with static that made the hair at my neck stand up. The object lay at its center like a drowned animal, luminescent in sections and matte in others, cold to the touch but pulsing under the skin like something breathing. Captain Hale approached with cautious steps and called out to identify the scene. Maya Lin, a freelance journalist who had caught a lift from the base, filmed with steady hands, though I could see her palms were shaking. Dr. Ravi Patel from the field lab tested the local electromagnetic flux and frowned. The first sensory impressions were five-fold in a single instant. Sight. The object shimmered between silver and basalt. Sound. A low harmonic like a distant bell played beneath the wind. Smell. An absence of organic rot that made the air taste thin. Touch. The gravel was warm, then strangely cool where it met the object's shadow. Temperature gradients moved across the object. Skin of the object, like slow breathing. We were trained to secure the perimeter and call NASA through the scientific liaison, but the link lagged and the sky seemed to hold its breath. At that moment, there was a choice. We could wait for protocol or act to preserve a life. My hands moved before my head agreed. We approached and found on a shallow bedding within the object's curve a figure, curled like a child but not human in proportion. Its skin changed color in a pattern that looked like a language. Its eyes, when it opened them, reflected not our faces but the constellations above, as if it carried the sky inside. I wrapped a blanket around it, even though the fabric felt wrong against its skin, as if the fibers tried to sing. Officer Sarah Cole read basic calming phrases aloud, while Prof. Amir Khan recorded spectral lines. The being did not speak with a voice. Instead, it projected an image into my mind, a wash of cold blue, and the notion of rescue, as if an idea could be lifted like a hand. The rescue scene contained at least 6 strong sensory moments. The light from our headlamps refracted in the creature's skin and painted shifting maps across our faces. The sound of the wind carried the scent of copper and old books. My gloves, rough from years of surgery, felt tender when I touched a wrist that hummed like a tuned reed. The taste of dust lingered and made my tongue dry. The blanket smelled suddenly of citrus, an illusion of comfort. I felt a pulse that was not heart, but rhythm. It synchronized with my own breath and made my chest ache with a foreign empathy. The first contact conversation was not a dialogue at first. It started as a negotiation of attitudes. I spoke aloud because humans speak to orient themselves. "We are here to help," I said. "Can you understand me?" I asked. The being did not answer verbally. It projected a sequence into my awareness of color and tone and a memory that was not mine. Then it pressed a strand of sensation into my skull, the equivalent of saying, "Yes." Elena tried to record the pattern. Jonas asked if it was hostile. "Not hostile," I answered out loud, even though the answer felt like mine and not mine. Maya whispered, "Is this telepathy?" And the being sent a small thought like a bell answering. Telepathy was a crude human word for a bandwidth it had used to index others. Dr. Patel murmured a vow to keep it alive and offered saline. The creature took the saline as if tasting the placental memory of water. We moved it into the med bay under the desolate fluorescence of the outpost and timed our breaths. The med bay smelled of antiseptic, but under it the object exuded a scent that evoked rain on stone and the hush of libraries at night. The conversation that followed combined spoken sentences and shared impressions, and it ran through 8 to 10 exchanges as we tried to translate intent into action. I asked if it was alone. It sent a carousel of images, of points of light converging, and a sensation of loneness, like an animal losing its pack. Emily Zhao, one of the junior techs who had come with the convoy, asked if we had a name to call it. We offered names in 3 languages, and it responded with a pattern that matched none but felt like a liaison. We called it Leah, after Maya joked that every dataset liked short names. The rescue and the first night bled into a procedural attempt to stabilize Leah. Our team had to improvise because the protocols were written for humans. The procedure we applied combined standard trauma stabilization with novel containment derived from observational physiology. We cleared airways, set IV lines, and monitored an unfamiliar bioelectrical rhythm. We used low-amplitude audio loops to entrain breathing patterns and a saline mix adjusted to ionic ratios detected in the creature's skin. The technical outline was simple but precise. It involved calibrated saline at lower osmolarity than human norm, insertion of non-metallic sensors that measured field gradients, and a low-frequency hum to prevent convulsions. These steps bought us time and allowed a different mode of communication to emerge. The procedure description above stood at about 300 characters in my notes, and in practice it felt longer because each movement was a vow. The next days were a succession of intimate interrogations and public revelations. In private, I sat by Leah and learned its rhythms. In public, Prof. Amir Khan insisted on contacting external agencies. The media arrived like a tide. Maya Lin filed a report and named the phenomenon quickly. Headlines splintered into fear and fascination. Some called it an instrument of study. Others called it a weapon. The institutional doubt crept in through formal emails and terse calls from NASA liaisons and from a skeptical editorial column that accused us of fabrication. But the real danger was not the skeptic on the page. It was a social reflex that amplified fear into policy. As Leah healed, it also revealed something else. It mirrored not only our actions, but our emotional state. When the team was anxious, Leah's skin flashed jagged patterns that triggered panic in local fauna and even in our own rest cycles. When a calm, meditative rhythm spread through the base, Leah's presence attenuated, breathing slowing, skin smoothing into hues that reflected dawn. It was behaving like a mirror for collective frequency. It was reflecting who we were. At the heart of my transformation was a backstory that shaped how I heard that mirror. I was raised in a noisiest neighborhood where alarms were more common than lullabies. As a child, I learned to translate sirens into code and to find small on-ramps to silence. In medical school, I trained under mentors who taught me to match breath before chasing a monitor reading. I left a thriving urban practice to come to this outpost because my sister Lena's disappearance 15 years earlier had left me with a hunger for remote truths. I spent a decade working in places where the sky had been the only witness. Loss taught me to sit with waiting and to refuse easy explanations. My training made me precise, my grief made me curious, and my solitude made me willing to listen. These 4 paragraphs of origin are not a confession of vanity. They are an explanation of why I was the one to sit with Leah when the world wanted to name it immediately. My history made me attentive to the small frequencies most would miss. It also made me vulnerable, because when Leah matched grief, my own scars became raw again. Leah began to teach in a way neither of us expected. The communication that evolved resembled a teacher and a student more than captor and captive. Through a series of images and emotion pulses, it conveyed an idea it called in our mind field, a concept that I later translated as observer effect in an experiential register. It suggested that when a population watches with fear, it strengthens a pattern physically. It presented examples like a mirror showing ripples when stones of panic were thrown into the collective pond. It used words like frequency, amplify, and observer, but not as nouns, more as instruments. We argued among ourselves about whether this was projection or perception. Elena Park insisted that correlation did not mean causation. Prof. Amir Khan mapped the skin pulses to global social metrics he claimed to pull from open sources. Maya interviewed people and found stories of synchronicities that matched Leah's timelines. Dr. Ravi Patel ran spectral analyses that showed microvariations in geomagnetic flux concurrent with viral posts. Officer Sarah Cole called for calm protocols. The tension in these debates was sharp because our sample was a single anomaly, and because any public announcement might trigger the very pattern Leah described. One night, after a long argument with external critics, Leah shifted from teaching to warning. The pattern it projected was colder this time. It showed us images of a massive structure in orbit people had nicknamed 3I or Atlas that reflected not only light but intention. It implied that Atlas had been cataloged and reduced to an Atlas entry and an acronym in the databases of observatories and in the mind of the public. People saw a dark object and thought steel and trajectory. Leah showed us another layer. Atlas seemed to function like a sensor array designed to read collective oscillations and feed them back, amplified. Leah said, with the faintest compression of sensation, that Atlas was no mere debris but a calibrator. It tuned itself to what we fed it. The revelation strained the room into silence. Jonas asked how an object could amplify emotion into physical effect. Leah sent a cascade that felt like a schematic and a metaphor entangled. Prof. Amir explained with caution, invoking terms like entanglement and morphogenetic field. He proposed that if a large non-biological structure could resonate with human networks, the feedback loops could create measurable shifts in behavior and even in weather patterns or power grids. The theory sat on the edge of plausibility, but the data underlined anomalies across multiple sensors. It was cold and easy to dismiss until the next morning when local birds refused to land, and the water in the outpost reservoir formed concentric ripples with no visible cause. The complexity escalated as the media caught wind of hints, and the internet rewrote our language into panic loops. The station was suddenly a node in a larger system where every tweet could become an amplifier. Maya posted a short clip of Leah that she framed as compassionate. Within hours, it was edited into a dozen fear-laden montages. Towns far away called and reported sleep disturbances and synchronous nightmares. A social scientist from a university I had worked with before, named Zoe Morales, ran a rapid survey that showed a surge in anxiety correlated with top trending tags referencing Atlas. The government liaison sent a terse message suggesting containment and embargo and hinted at takeover. I remember the smell of burnt toast from the mess hall that morning and how it felt like the world was warming to a fever pitch. There was a cascade of public reactions. Some groups rallied to demand evacuation. Some accused us of hiding evidence. Others formed online circles pledging to flood digital spaces with calming imagery. The names in that public chorus included a senator named Claire Donovan who called for hearings, a blogger named Isaac Torres who amplified fear, and a psychologist, Dr. Lila Serrano, who urged containment. The list of people acting with distinct actions expanded weekly, and by then included at least 8 named actors who shaped public responses. We had a choice to either let the reflex play out
or to test the hypothesis that an intentional collective practice could alter the feedback from Atlas. Leah proposed an experiment that sounded absurd and almost childlike. It wanted us to gather people and focus on choosing calm as a practice it called a frequency shift. It taught a simple protocol of breath, visualization, breath in to a count of 4, hold to 2, breathe out to 6, and imagine a mirror smoothing the surface of water. The being suggested that waves of intent, if coordinated, would produce a discrete damping effect that Atlas would register and reflect back. The turning point scene required a public call and coordination. We organized a small pilot with the station staff plus volunteers from a nearby town. Zoe helped design the survey and Maya prepared footage. Prof. Amir and Dr. Lila created measurable parameters to test heart rate variability and social media sentiment before and after the event. The pilot was sensory dense, from
"The morning smelled of coffee and diesel." The voices softened into a careful murmur. The touch of cold morning air on skin was sharp. The taste of fear was metallic in some throats. The sound of collective breathing became an instrument. We recorded data and watched Leah respond in real time. Its skin waves flattened. The electromagnetic noise around us decreased. The feed from the distant orbiting array showed a micro change in reflected spectrum. It was small but significant. The experiment had the effect of turning a panic loop into a practical test of agency. The dialogue during that cluster of sessions between Leah and our team ran long. It contained 8 to 10 exchanges per session where we asked questions and it returned impressions and instructions. At one point, I asked it if Atlas was sentient. Leah sent a pulse that tasted like iron and answered that sentience was a word for one end of a spectrum. Was it created to judge us? Jonas demanded. Leah conveyed an image of calibration, an instrument designed to attune to ecosystems, not to condemn. Maya asked if it could be turned off. The being showed a lattice of consequence and choice. It will reflect the weight you give it. Leah impressed into the room, and I felt the words resound through my ribcage. Dr. Patel asked whether the damping could scale. Leah sent back a pattern like nested waves and a sound like chimes. The conversation was alternately clinical and absurdly intimate. We argued, we doubted, we practiced breathing together until the metrics showed a reproducible effect. The experiment moved from the outpost to an organized worldwide call to practice intentional calm at a scheduled time. We released a simple script and invited people to join online and in person. The CTA for comments that I read aloud in the video we posted asked viewers to share simple experiences they had ever had of inexplicable synchrony, and to begin their reply with either yes once or never but curious, so we could aggregate anecdotal data. The community response was immediate and varied. The escalation that followed was messy and instructive. Major outlets ran fear-focused stories that framed our call as naive. Others framed it as a potential new kind of activism. The social media network that had amplified panic now split into threads of solidarity and threads of mockery. We saw measurable shifts in hashtags in favor of calm, yet we also saw coordinated amplification of scaremongering by some actors who perhaps profit from chaos. The names repeated in the discourse included Claire Donovan, Isaac Torres, Zoe Morales, Dr. Leela Serrano, Elena Park, Prof. Amir Khan, Jonas Hale, and Maya Lin. Each contributed in distinct ways. Some published peer-led notes. Some organized listening circles. The complex interplay taught us about how narrative spread and how a collective choice must contend with entrenched attention economies. At the same time, Leah became more fragile when exposed to hostile coverage. Its skin-veined and its rhythms slid into jagged intervals. It taught us that exposure without context can weaponize attention. The moment of greatest tension arrived like a physical pressure change. A private contractor attempted to extract Leah under instructions from a distant office, and their equipment emitted high-frequency noise that destabilized the creature. The base alarm then was not societal, it was an internal panic. I remember the smell of hot plastic and the tick of overloaded generators and the raw metallic taste in my mouth. In 2 paragraphs that reached 500 to 600 characters each, the scene tightened. The crew argued in the corridor. Words like property and containment and national security crashed against words like empathy and consent. I physically stood between the extraction team and Leah. Jonas grabbed a hand wrench and placed himself beside me. The contractor called for orders, and the liaison insisted on sterile chain of command. Leah responded by retracting into a shell of light, and the air grew heavy as if history itself had been folded. The tension compressed into a decision point where either institutional force would override our ethics or we would risk being accused of obstruction. We chose to protect Leah and to go public in a way that would force accountability. We streamed a talk where Prof. Amir explained our metrics and Zoe published the survey results. The world watched. The contractor withdrew. The immediate crisis was averted, and yet the night left us all trembling. That night, Leah revealed a fragment of Atlas' secret that chilled me. It showed a record of past events, a rolling archive, as if Atlas had been shadowing planetary systems and responding to emergent moods throughout epochs. It displayed moments when amplifications coincided with systemic shocks and moments when damping correlated with resilience. It did not claim judgment, but it showed patterns. The implication was that Atlas reinforced the strongest dominant pattern in a system. When fear dominated, it amplified. When deliberate peace spread, it attenuated. The secret was that Atlas had a sensitivity threshold that was now within the range of our global networks. The knowledge was chilling because it meant our data streams and our attention economy were a part of the mechanism. If left unchecked, the system could escalate to feedback loops with large-scale consequences. If we chose to act, it meant we had a real lever to change systemic outcomes. In response, we organized a coordinated global experiment that mapped onto Leah's damping practice. We partnered with a psychology network led by Dr. Leela Serrano, with outreach support from Zoe and coverage by Maya and others. We created an accessible practice that combined breath visualization, short meditative guidance, and a social signal protocol that asked participants to post calming images with a tag that algorithms could track. The technical steps for the coordination required precise timing, synchronization server-side encryption of follower counts, and a reproducible breathing audio track to measure entrainment across heart
sensors. This technical description amounted to about 300 characters in the operations memo, but in action, it transformed into a choreography of millions of small acts. The experiment was noisy at first. Bots tried to gain the tag, trolls posted false images, but in pockets, the damping effect registered. Local weather anomalies flattened, power grid anomalies subsided in an area, social sentiment scores shifted. The data did not prove causation at a global level, but the localized patterns were statistically meaningful. The turning point felt like the ocean settling after an undercurrent. People in cities reported a sharp decrease in panic incidents. A town council in the nearby county cited reduced emergency calls. The coordinated practice scaled into a week of focused sessions that millions joined in multiple time zones. The images we shared were not polished. They were hands, eyes, horizons, and simple commands to breathe and imagine a mirror smoothing the ripples. It was not about avoiding reality. It was about choosing the frequency with which we met it. Over the next weeks, MAGA-style commentators and alarmist hosts continued to manufacture fear stories, but a new counter-narrative had been seeded. The media had to change the frame because viewership patterns shifted. The narrative no longer fully served panic. This social shift did not erase the structural problems that create fear, but it showed that a concerted collective practice could alter an amplifying mechanism. The epilogue that follows maps the transformation in 3 temporal moments. 1 month later, the station was quieter. Leah had stabilized into a pattern of slow, pale cycles that matched dawns. The immediate data showed a measurable drop in local anxiety-related emergency visits by roughly 16%, as reported by Dr. Lila Serrano and corroborated by Zoe Morales surveys. The outpost had become a small research hub. Elena Park published a measured paper that avoided sensationalism and instead described field correlations. Maya continued to document lived experiences, while Prof. Amir began to coordinate with international observatories. The public discourse slowly shifted from sensationalism to curiosity and practical practice. People I had never met wrote emails describing how the breathing practice had helped them sleep. The presence of Laya changed the way our town organized public meetings for a while, and local schools adopted a short practice to help students calm before tests. There was a guarded optimism and an awareness that we had started something that needed careful stewardship. 3 months later, the project had expanded into a decentralized network of local hubs facilitated by online material. We had added privacy-preserving protocols and community moderators. Dr. Ravi Patel and Elena Park had developed a protocol to measure small electromagnetic shifts that accompanied coordinated practice. The dataset was messy but directive. There was no simple cause-effect, but enough repeated signatures to demand deeper investigation. NGOs reached out. Senator Claire Donovan opened a hearing, but the tone was different now. Instead of immediate alarm, the hearing asked for a
framework to protect agency and to study the feedback loops in our information ecology. Some industries adjusted marketing strategies that had been profiting from anxiety. Isaac Torres published a long-form investigation on attention economies and profit from panic, and it created uncomfortable but necessary conversations. Leah had become a mirror that forced institutions to account for the ways they amplified fear for engagement. The social texture of neighborhoods changed in small ways as more people learned to exercise choice about attention. 6 months after the incident, things were transformed in measurable ways, though not completely healed. The 3-Eye Atlas remained in orbit, and its physical properties were still under study by international teams that included Dr. Lila Serrano, Prof. Amir Khan, and external teams from observatories associated with NASA and other agencies. New protocols for global signal monitoring had been proposed. Leah remained under protective custody with explicit ethical oversight and a multi-institutional review board that included community representatives like Maya and Zoe. The collective practice had evolved into a toolkit for crisis de-escalation that some emergency services began to adopt experimentally. There were still critics, and there were still actors who sought to weaponize attention. But the experiment had proven that an organized collective choice could dampen amplification, and that the relationship between observables and observers was not passive. For many people, the experience catalyzed a personal awakening toward the idea that attention is a resource to be practiced and shared. The final measurable changes included a modest decline in social panic indexes and a new body of research that bridged social psychology with physical field measurements. In closing, let me return to why this story matters for you. I did not set out to save an alien to become a prophet. I chose to act in the small world of a desert outpost, and that choice rippled out. What Leah and Atlas taught us is not primarily about extraterrestrials. It is about how the systems we build with our attention can become instruments of harm or instruments of healing. The mirror is not moral by itself, it reflects what we bring. If you want a practical takeaway, begin with breath. Practice the simple count in and out, and choose to amplify calm when you see panic mounting online or in your circle. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the ongoing investigation and access the practice guide in the top comment. Share your experience below, starting with yes, once, or never, but curious, so we can gather real accounts that matter. Remember that the universe is not a judge, it is a listener, and our choices tune the instruments that listen. We are not victims of the cosmos, we are its composers.